You might think sword and sandal stories are all about gladiators and empires. Bronze gleaming under the sun, sand kicked up in the arena, heroes locked in duels of blood and glory. But what if I told you that the true power of the genre lies in the shadows? Not in emperors or armies, but in the ancient beasts lurking just beyond the known world. Forget what you thought you knew. Today, we're uncovering how mythic creatures can transform your sword and sandal stories into something truly timeless. Welcome to another episode of Genre Worldbuilding with Just-in-Time Worldbuilding with your host, Marie Mullaney. There is too many words in that sentence. Anyway, roll the intro. First, we're going to talk about the trap of gritty realism. When most people picture sword and sandal fantasy, they imagine muscle-bound heroes striding through dusty arenas, chariots crunching over the desert, the clash of swords, the roar of crowds, empires rising and falling under the will of man. It's a genre that seems obsessed with the human ambition, human strength, human politics. And in many ways, that's because the modern version of sword and sandal was born in the 20th century and on the silver screen, not in the ancient world. The genre we know today grew out of pulp adventure stories and peplum cinema. Those mid-century epics like Ben-Hur and Spartacus. I'm Spartacus. You gotta say it back. Anyway, Clash of the Titans and so on. Later came the darker reinventions. Conan the Barbarian, Gladiator, the first one, not the second one, and every desert sun, sweat and sand retelling since then of those stories. Each of these stories drew heavily on the aesthetics of antiquity. Marble temples, iron swords, the drama of empire. But most of them left something crucial behind. The living presence of the divine and the monstrous. That omission was deliberate. By the time the genre reached modern audiences, the cultural mood was one of gritty realism. We wanted our ancient heroes to be relatable, our worlds historically grounded. So gods became metaphor, monsters became political allegories, a hydra might represent corruption, a titan might symbolize tyranny, but they were rarely treated as real forces within the world. The supernatural was reinterpreted as psychological, the divine as delusional. And while that approach can create powerful human stories, and I'm not throwing stones at any of the classics, it does also strip the genre of its oldest heartbeat. If you go back to the actual ancient epics like Gilgamesh, the Iliad, the Epic of Baal, you'll notice something pretty striking. They're all full of monsters. Gilgamesh battles Humbaba, guardian of the cedar forest, a creature whose breath is death and whose face is made of fire. Baal slays Yam, the sea god of chaos, to bring order to the world. Even Achilles faces divinely sent beasts and rivers that rise up to drown him for his hubris. In these stories, monsters weren't metaphor for corruption or fear, they were the cosmic boundaries between human and divine. To fight one was to test the limits of existence itself. That's what modern sword and sandal sometimes forgets. The ancient didn't divide the world into the real and the mythic. To them, the world was mythic. The gods walked beside men, monsters marked the edges of civilization, and every river or desert wind might still remember the voice of creation. When we remove that element, we make our sword and sandal stories smaller. The truth is, the ancients didn't see a human-centric universe. They saw themselves as fragile players in a vast, divine landscape, a world where the human and the monstrous were woven together. Okay, but we know all those monsters didn't exist in the epics, right? And I can hear you say that, and yeah, sure. But why did the ancients imagine them existing or talk about them existing? What were those monsters for? Why fill your world with sea serpents and bullmen and lion-headed gods and scorpion-tailed queens? Because monsters were how ancient cultures remembered the world. Before the neat compartments of history and mythology, the line between storytelling and history was pretty razor thin. You didn't need to talk about monsters because you were superstitious. You needed them because the world was dangerous and unpredictable, and story was not only a way to make sense of it, but also a way to communicate that danger, to show the unknown and the unexplained. Every civilization placed them on the edges of the maps and in myths. To the Greeks, Scylla and Charybdis guarded the perilous straits. To the Babylonians, Tiamat's corpse literally was the world. The Egyptians carved hybrid gods, falcon-headed, jackal-headed, crocodile-headed, because they saw divinity in every living form. These beings marked the threshold between what people knew and what they feared to imagine. You can think of them as the world's guardrails of meaning. Beyond them lay chaos, the uncharted sea, the haunted mountain, the desert from which no one returned. For storytellers today, that's a genuine gold mine. When you build mythic creatures into your world, you're not just decorating your setting. You're not just giving the hero a thing to fight. You're building the memory structure of your civilization. The monster becomes a mnemonic device, a way for a culture to store existential knowledge. The gods punish pride. The sea hungers for sacrifice. The forest remembers the axe. Each myth is a way to encode danger, morality, and respect for the forces beyond human control. And that's why sword and sandal worlds that lean too hard into human-only realism lose something vital. They forget that in the ancient imagination, the monstrous wasn't something to be conquered. It was something to be negotiated with. You didn't slay the dragon because you hated it and you were going to overcome it. You slayed it or served it because you wanted a place in the cosmic order it represented. In our world building, making monsters real builds the world as those ancient storytellers saw it. It allows us to explore those stories about man's world crashing against the boundaries that cannot be explained. If we make those boundaries explainable, if we wink at our audience and write the monsters out of the story as superstition, we lose the mythic truth of the genre. Those monsters represent the boundaries of man's knowledge and control. Wrestling with them opens powerful themes. So let's talk about those themes, because the ancients didn't invent monsters just to scare children or test heroes. They used them to talk about everything that frightened, fascinated, and defined humanity itself. And when we reintroduce that lens, we rediscover the genre's forgotten power. It's not about what the monster is, but what it reveals about the human standing before it. The first theme is the theme of order and chaos. The oldest myth in the world is the taming of chaos. Many ancient epics begin with a world in chaos and some hero or god wrestling it into shape. Baal slays the sea serpent Yam to bring fertility to the land. Marduk kills Tiamat and fashions the heavens from her corpse. Heracles cleans the stables of Aegeus by redirecting the river, imposing human order on divine disorder. When you make your monsters real in that fashion, you can explore that eternal struggle between structure and entropy, between civilization and the wild pulse beneath it. If the hero kills the beast, they're not just saving lives, they're reaffirming the boundaries that let humans pretend the world is controllable. They're establishing order over chaos. When the beast wins, the boundary breaks. And maybe there's a theme you want to explore because you want to show that an empire that has grown too rigid shatters, and the monster's return signals the necessary collapse of the old order. Our second theme is the theme of hubris and the limits of power. When your characters can truly face gods and monsters, they're reminded of scale. Sword and sandal heroes are often ambitious: kings, generals, prophets, conquerors. But once the world itself pushes back, we remember what the ancient storytellers knew: power always comes at a cost. Think of Odysseus taunting the Cyclops and how that arrogance calls down Poseidon's wrath. Or Gilgamesh, half divine, setting out to kill Humbaba simply to prove he can. Or think of Bellerophon, who flies up to Mount Olympus on Pegasus, only for Zeus to send a gadfly to sting the flying horse. And the winged horse throws Bellerophon off and he falls to the ground to be a cripple. In a genre obsessed with dominion, monsters and gods bring humility. They remind your characters and your readers that some things cannot be conquered. Some parts of the world or the universe is too vast for human mastery. The theme is fantastic for tragic stories set in sword and sandal. Your hero might lose, but the lesson they learn is for the reader to remember. Our third theme is nature as the divine. Making monsters real reawakens the sacredness of the natural world. Ancient cultures didn't separate wilderness from holiness. The sea was a god, the mountain a god, the storm a god, and to anger them was sacrilege. A sword and sandal story that treats a giant serpent or bull-headed guardian as real leans into that ancient environmental philosophy. The world is alive, and man is not its master. When your hero cuts down the beast, ask what grows in its place. If they slay the sea god's child to expand their harbor, what does the next tide bring? These aren't just plot points, they're reflections of ecological and spiritual balance, the kind of themes our modern world feels keenly, but rarely frames mystically. The fourth theme is the theme of identity and transformation, and it is a powerful one. The hero who faces the monster changes, sometimes literally, scarred, cursed, or blessed, sometimes internally, shaken, reborn, redefined. And this is because the monster is not only external, it is the boundary between who the hero is and who they might become. By making your beasts real, you let that transformation become visceral. The blood, the awe, the fear, it all manifests in the internal journey. In this sense, sword and sandal stories can reclaim the psychological depth that's usually reserved for mythic fantasy. When a gladiator faces a lion that speaks his name, or a priestess meets a serpent that mirrors her voice, we see the hero learn who they are and who they might become. And that makes the story deeper than just a monster slaying fest. And our fifth theme is faith and rewards. Real monsters also restore real gods, not as distant ideals, but as dangerous, tangible presences. In many sword and sandal settings, religion is a background texture. There's a couple of temples, a couple of priestly titles, but this is not how it was. In the ancient world, faith was the interface between humanity and the monstrous divine. Our heroes leant on the divine as something bigger than themselves that could be bargained with, something that set rules that were sometimes capricious, often cruel, but a part of the world that had to be negotiated with. And the divine was also aspirational. There were those who could rise to power, those who could become divine themselves. It was a reward for a life lived with excellence. That opens up themes of what would a hero do with a power if granted to it? What would a hero do with power if granted it? If they became a god, how will they treat humans? And what action is rewarded? What does a life lived well mean? When you bring those themes back into sword and sandal storytelling, you reconnect the genre with one of its oldest heartbeats, the idea that the world is bigger than us. Okay, so that's a lot of yapping about why you should have real monsters, and hopefully you're sold on the thesis now. But next, we'll talk about how you should actually do this. Before we get there, give me a moment to invite you to sign up to be a member of the Just-in-Time Worldbuilding channel. For less than a cup of coffee a month, you get early access to my videos, a members-only live stream once a month, and access to some really awesome worksheets for your world building. There are 3 tiers of membership: build it in straw, build it in wood, and build it in stone. And while they get different rewards, all of them get worksheet access, live streams, and early access to my videos. So if you want to support what I do here, hit the join button and become a Just-in-Timer today. And a very, very, very giant thank you to all of my members whose support make videos like this one possible. Alrighty, enough theory. Let's get into the nuts and bolts of actually making monsters for your sword and sandal world. So how do you make monsters that feel real? Not just as creatures, but as parts of your world's living mythology. I like to think of good monster design as having 3 interlocking layers: symbolic, ecological, and narrative. If you hit all 3, your creatures stop being set dressing and start feeling like they belong to a world with history, meaning, and consequences. So as a first step in designing monsters, let's break down those 3 layers. First, the symbolic layer. What does it mean? Every great monster is an idea first. In ancient stories, creatures were rarely random. They embodied fears, desires, or moral boundaries. The serpent in Eden isn't just a snake, it's the embodiment of temptation. The Minotaur isn't just a half bull, it's the monstrous consequence of human arrogance and divine punishment. So before you draw teeth or claws on a creature, ask yourself, what does this creature stand for? Is it a symbol of chaos, challenging an empire that's grown too rigid? Is it a reflection of hunger, greed, lust, or decay? Is it something sacred that humans have profaned? Let's take a look at some examples from mythic history. The basilisk, the creature whose gaze kills, isn't just about the danger, it's about the cost of forbidden knowledge. the idea that there are truths too vast for human eyes. The griffin, half eagle, half lion, unites the two kings of the sky and land, making it a perfect imperial symbol. It means dominance, surveillance, and the right to rule. If you build your monster with meaning first, everything else, the biology, the behavior, the legends, flow naturally from that seed. Remember, humans are symbolic creatures, so think of what this monster should represent. Then, the ecological layer, how does it fit in? So, once you know what the creature means, you need to make sure it follows mythic logic. I did a whole video on mythic logic, which you can check out in the information card. But as a quick recap, mythic logic doesn't mean you have to explain its genetics or its evolution or anything like that. But your world should treat the monster like a real part of the ecosystem. What does it eat? Where does it live? How does it interact with the environment? If it's a sea monster, does it follow the currents? If it breathes fire, what do people do to prevent fires near its nesting grounds? When you design this layer, you're turning myth into texture. A creature's habits can shape architecture, travel routes, even economies. If griffins hunt near mountain passes, caravans can build shrines and hire guards. Maybe there are people who collect the feathers because they make the fluffiest pillows. Get your griffin feathers here. Great night's rest guaranteed. Or if a basilisk nests in some ruins, tomb robbing becomes not just illegal but suicidal. And there could be some grifter who promises to take your body there so it'll be safe and then of course doesn't, Things that treat the monsters as real in your world. In world building terms, this is where you prove that your monster belongs in the world, not as an aberration, but integrated in your system's living settings. And then finally, the narrative layer. Why does it matter? This is where you ask, how does this creature serve your story? Every beast should have a narrative function. Sometimes it's the obstacle, a trial the hero must overcome. Sometimes it's the mirror, a living embodiment of the hero's flaw. And sometimes it's the catalyst, and its appearance changes the fate of nations. When you're writing Sword and Sandal, this layer is especially important because the genre thrives on confrontation between man, God, and fate. Your monster isn't just a fight scene, it's a question. Will the hero conquer nature or be consumed by it? Will the empire harness the divine or be punished for daring to try? There is one warning I want to issue here. It is easy to fall into the trap of designing monsters just because they look awesome. And I mean, look, I love a good clawed, glowing, many-eyed terror as much as the next writer. They are fun. But if your creatures don't serve the world or the story, they're just noise. You've seen it. Those movie scenes where 50 CGI beasts crash through a battlefield, and you feel nothing as the viewer because they're not symbols. They don't serve the narrative. They're not part of the ecosystem. They're not invested in the story's soul. Real monsters that serve the story, carry weight. They should feel like echoes of the world's creation myths, like the planet itself is remembering something old and dangerous. So if you ever find yourself adding a monster just because it's cool, pause and ask, what does this creature really add to your story? What does reading about it give the reader? And if you can answer that, then well done. You're building an excellent mythic story. All right, let's pull all of the caveats and warnings and layers together into a step-by-step of putting together a monster like this. So here's a simple framework to build monsters that feel like they actually leave footprints. Of course, this is not the only way. Okay? There are plenty of ways to build monsters, but you come to me for advice, so here's mine. Step 1. Choose the fear or idea that the monster represents. Every good monster starts with a human truth. Ask yourself, what do people in your world fear? What is their great unknown? For ancient cultures, it was often the sea, the dark, death, plague, or divine wrath. For yours, it might be empire, decay, hunger, forgetting, loss of power, something magic, and so on. Start there. Don't think teeth or scales yet. Think emotion. A monster is a metaphor given flesh. It's the shape of a story's anxiety. Once you know what it represents, everything else becomes a form of expression. Step 2. Anchor it in the world's logic. You have to make sure the creature belongs in your setting, otherwise it feels like you're just plopping a metaphor down. So, how do people in your world explain the monster? Do they worship it? Do they hunt it? Do they gather its feathers? What does it mean in the cultural fabric of your world? Think about its environmental niche. What does it eat? What happens when it dies? Are there things that feed off it? This isn't about science. They're about how the creature fits in the world. And it makes the difference between a big lizard and the sand mother whose children swallow armies whole and whose breath turns soldiers to salt, because you know what the creature is in the world. Step 3. Define its impact. What does this creature do to the world around it? How does its existence ripple through politics, trade, religion, or warfare? Maybe an empire builds its calendar around the migrations of sky serpents. Maybe a city's economy thrives on mining the shells of dead leviathans. Maybe its appearance heralds drought or its blood fuels miracles. By defining your impact, you make the world feel reactive. You remind the audience that myth leaves consequences, economic, ecological, and emotional. And step 4, tie it to the character and the theme. Once the world reacts, bring it back to the personal. How does your monster connect to your protagonist's journey? If it's an external threat, what inner conflict does it mirror? If it's an ally, what moral compromise does that alliance cost? And finally, step 5, give it a legacy. Think beyond the moment. What stories will people tell after this creature is gone? Because that's how real myths work. They linger. Every culture reshapes the same monster to say something new. And your world could do the same. Maybe the bones of your serpent become sacred relics. Maybe a tyrant builds his throne atop its skull. Maybe a child born during its death throes is said to bear its mark. This step turns a monster from a single plot beat into an enduring legend. And legends are what make a world feel alive. So to recap, here is your quick checklist for monster creation. Start with the fear or the idea. What does the monster symbolize? Then world logic. Where does it live and how does it fit in to the ecology? Then impact. How does the world react to the monster? What impact does it have on cultures, economies, and politics? Then character and theme. What truth does it expose? And finally, legacy. How is it remembered? And those are my thoughts on sword and sandal monsters. If you made it all the way to here, drop a monster in the comments. A huge thank you to all of you for watching, and a special thanks to my channel members who make videos like this possible and give me some financial stability, especially the just-in-timers of the Stone tier. Epic, Laura Bones 79, A. Walliard, Neil Buckley, Necromancer JM, Katie Kofi Mug, and Tony Lamanna, along with the wood tier and the straw tier. Your help allows me to keep making these videos, and I am very, very grateful. If you would like a free way to support the channel, right now one way is simply to watch another video. And if you enjoyed this video, you'll probably like my video on how to create myths in fantasy worlds, which you can check out right now on screen, or you can follow whatever the algorithm is recommending for you, and I will see you soon for another episode of Just in Time World Building.